So 3 years ago, Chris Wilson got dropped off in downtown Baltimore. How do I click this here? Okay. Excellent. So 3 years ago, Chris got dropped off in downtown Baltimore. He had just been released from Jessup Prison, where he had spent 15 years incarcerated. And so when Chris got dropped off in downtown Baltimore, he was without a job, he was without education, he was without family, and he was without a home. He was homeless. He had $50 in his pocket. And Chris, being Chris, had the wherewithal to walk 3 miles to the University of Baltimore, and by that night had talked his way into a full ride and an apartment on campus. And Chris, being Chris, by the end of that month had started his first business. 3 years later, that business does $500,000 in revenue and employs 30 other ex-offenders. Chris is a visionary. Absolutely visionary. When he was incarcerated, he had a life sentence. He got sentenced at 17. And he drew out a master plan. And he said, I might be spending the rest of my life in prison, but I'm going to start a billion-dollar company. He learned 4 languages. He taught himself real estate, accounting, entrepreneurship. He ran businesses from behind bars, and they used the money to buy things like cigarettes and books. And so when he got paroled 15 years later and started the Barclay Investment Corporation, Chris had that vision of opportunity not only for himself, but for other people in that situation. Chris has done the hardest thing that social entrepreneurs have to do, which is identify a hard social problem and solve it. He knows how to go find unemployed ex-offenders and give them a solid wage and a good job to add real value in our community. He goes to developers and says, just give us a little bit of that contract. We'll sweep the floors, we'll shovel the snow, we'll throw up the drywall, we'll do the spackling, we'll install the molding, we'll work off hours, we'll work overnight, just give us a chance. And when one of Chris's employees came onto a school site and was looking for his cell phone, pulled it out and dropped a bag of marijuana, Chris fired him on the spot. And he says, you don't understand, this is our second chance, we don't get a third chance, you're out of here. And we've got a waiting list for employment. And as impressive as Chris is, when you ask him what the limiting factor is for him scaling his impact, it's not money, it's clearly not lack of a big idea, it's talent, it's capacity. Chris is the only one marketing. Chris is the only one doing business development. Chris manages people on the site. Chris is recruiting staff. It's talent. 10 years ago, Sarah Heminger was a PhD student at Johns Hopkins. She was born and raised in Indiana, came to Baltimore to do biomedical engineering, and 5 years into that program realized that she was deeply alone and isolated. And that in her drive to work every day, she looked out the car window and saw Baltimore and saw blight and dilapidation and didn't feel at all connected to the people there. And when she passed the schools like Dunbar and Ace and Douglas, saw thousands of students every day with whom she had no connection. And she felt alone. She didn't have any sense of family or community in Baltimore. And so she started mentoring and developing one student, which turned into 5 students, which turned into 10 students, then turned into 150 students. And to keep all of these kids, she had to recruit her friends and her peers and friends of friends to get involved as well. And what they discovered is that if you built an extended family for Baltimore's most vulnerable children, so these are kids literally with a 1.0 or lower, delinquency of 25% or higher, many of them, if not all of them, from broken homes, violent neighborhoods, that you can get 100% of them 10 years later through high school, you can get 90% of them to college, and you get 80% of them to graduate. She has built a radical extended family that not only benefits those children and their futures, but the thousands of volunteers that she's mobilized in the process. And they feel far more connected now to their community. They feel far more connected to the city of Baltimore. And when you ask Sarah what the limiting factor is to growth, why Thread's only operating at 3 schools instead of 100, it's not money. She's an incredible fundraiser, Shoka Fellow, Echoing Green Fellow. It's not a lack of a big idea or know-how. She knows how to solve one of the most intractable problems of our time. It's talent. It's top talent. She needs to stop using Google spreadsheets. She needs CRM. She needs systems. She needs operations. She needs an HR policy where she can recruit and retain top staff and develop them and give them the skills and the tools they need to manage not just 3,000 volunteers, but 10,000 volunteers. And if you did that, you can change the destiny of an entire city. because you're working with kids who otherwise, year after year after year, are subject to the dropout factory and the school-to-prison pipeline. So at Baltimore Core, we believe that Baltimore is truly the greatest city in America, and it's on the backs of people like Chris and Sarah that we're changing the game. We're flipping the script. We have lived with some hard problems for a very, very long time. So long, in fact, that we have moved from viewing them as problems to opportunities. So we're recruiting the best next generation talent, that's you, to go work with Chris and to go work with Sarah and to be scale builders. 30 years ago, there was not social entrepreneurship. It wasn't a field. And so it was hugely important that Ashoka and Echoing Green and Draper Richards Kaplan and Teach for America invented the field, and they built it. And 30 years later, we've got an extraordinary cadre of social entrepreneurs. I am convinced that the next chapter is getting the scale builders involved. It's taking that NICE program to high volume. It's seeing institutional and systemic change, not just building a business model that works. And you can only do that if you've got some of the best minds in the country working on this as feverishly as we do to advance traditional business practice, right? Corporate America, finance, Wall Street, where there's a huge apparatus and a huge infrastructure to get talented people like you involved. And that's good and important, but it's not the only way. And you're badly needed in Baltimore. So our folks, just for a little clarity, have MBAs, PhDs, JDs, and they're working with the best change makers in the world. Every day we ask ourselves, why can't Baltimore be to social change what New York is to finance? Or San Francisco is to technology? Why not? Why can't we flip the script? We're so much more than the wire. Let me close with one story. So I had a mentor and a teacher in high school. So I'm from Baltimore, I'm a public school kid, who saw in me so much more than I saw in myself at the time. She really took me on her wing, and she saw me on my way, and we stayed in touch. And so we were getting lunch last year, and I asked her how it was going. And I asked her, after 30 years, are you still learning things as a teacher, as an educator? She said, yeah, actually I am. And I had a moment in my English class the other day where I spoke to two young women, let's call them Keisha and Jasmine, and they were doing what teenagers do, right? Talking during class, chatting to one another, gossiping, texting. They were being 17, and they didn't want to learn AP English. And this is in a big public high school in Baltimore, inner city school. And my friend and the teacher says, Keisha, Jasmine, you have to do a better job of supporting one another. Like, stop talking to each other during class, like you're being rude. Do a better job of supporting one another. And they looked at her and they gave her this stone face, which if you ever work with young people, you know the look, right? The look that just puts ice in your veins. And so later she was talking to a colleague and said, you know, Keisha and Jasmine were blabbing off in my class, and I found it hugely distracting, and I told them they need a better job of supporting one another. And her teacher said, a better job of supporting one another. Did you know that they live in a homeless shelter in West Baltimore, where one of them has to wait in line every night to secure a bed, and they share that bed. And while one of them is waiting in line for that bed, the other one is working the shift at Wendy's. And that's to pay for the bus fare to get to school. And every day they switch. So every day after school, one of them is waiting for the bed, the other one's working the night shift at Wendy's. And I thought that story was so poignant because what was obvious and being pointed out there is they are supporting one another. We are a tough, resilient city with tough, resilient people. And for the first time in 65 years, we're growing again. We're getting bigger. And Keisha and Jasmine deserve better leadership, and they're getting better leadership at the grassroots every single day. And with your help, we'll do more and we'll do bigger. And I think this story of Baltimore being the greatest city in America will be true. But it'll only be true if you come join us. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you so much for having me today. My colleague Sheila's here. She's much cooler and much smarter than me. So come see us afterwards and come join us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mrim Boutla, and I'm a recovering neuroscientist. I learned in my PhD how the brain rewires itself as a result of experience. And I wanted to do that because I grew up in the projects in Switzerland. Yes, there are projects in Switzerland. And in projects, there are always the same problems, right? Drugs, domestic violence. And I quickly realized that it was not a knowledge problem. Since I was in grade school, I was told that drugs were bad. Yet there were people in my classroom dealing every day. Domestic violence doesn't solve anything, yet when people feel discouraged, they get to violence and take their kids and their wives as punching balls. It's not a knowledge problem. So I thought, wow, if I can understand the dissociation between knowledge and action and have an impact to break that cycle of knowing better but not doing better, I could cure stupidity. So I went to university, the first one in my family to go past 9th grade, and then I learned through psychology, the science of the mind, that you could actually not only do that, but you could put people in an fMRI machine and watch their brain and how it changes through experience. And I was hooked. I was like, brain plasticity, the process by which I can rewire the brain and train it to become less stupid. Got a full ride to the University of Rochester to do that, and then went for my postdoc at Brown, looking at early markers of Alzheimer's disease, a reverse brain plasticity problem. And then I realized that I had become very good at something I didn't like to do. Statistical analysis, writing papers, and going to conferences talking about a science that I didn't have the tools to impact on people. So I was there at Brown, I was like, oh, what a neuroscientist does when they don't want to do neuroscience. And I started reading because, of course, you become good at research, so online research became my little gig on the side. And I found out, you know, I'm very good at understanding how the brain makes decisions and how the brain wires itself in making the decisions through confirmation biases again and again. What are the big decisions we make in life? Who we're going to marry and grow old with, if we're going to have kids, and if so, how we're going to raise them, and how are we going to make money? I'm not the Dr. Ruth type, kids, but I became fascinated with the idea of how we change intentions into success and how we define success. And here I am at Brown. So I said the best way to do that is actually to go to the Career Center. So I show up at the Career Center and I say, hey, I know how the brain works, or more or less. Maybe I can help your PhDs who don't want to become faculty member kind of do something else. I kind of know the feeling. And so I showed up at the Career Center. 8 months later, they hired me, and it was right in 2003. You might remember that by 2005, there was microfinance. By 2008, there were big companies like Seventh Generation and Stonyfield Farm who were starting to get bigger. And then I met Mark Albion. Mark Albion founded Net Impact when he was at Harvard Business School. And since the 80s, he's been inspiring young people to turn their knowledge into service. And I found his book very inspiring, but I said, you don't have the roadmap for how that happens in the trenches. I have that and have developed it. At Brown, at the Kelley School of Business, we have to turn e-learning into this powerful machine to help students use their brain to follow their heart. We founded More Than Money Careers in 2010, and we're now in 52 universities. University of Maryland was our 10th client, so we've been partnering with you guys for 4 years. How do we do that? You have to understand that the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but the absolute illusion of knowledge. The era where you have to choose between meaning and money is gone. You can actually have both, and I'm going to teach you how. Because the most important thing for you to understand is your triple fit. Your skills, your cultural preferences, and your industry all fit into your dream job. And I'm going to help you understand that. Of course, we have legacy things, and your degree makes you very fluent at 1 or 2 levels of the triple fit, but rarely at all 3. So we start with that. We start helping you through our e-learning platform, available at More Than Money Careers, how to really understand how your education fits in, because it's very valuable. I'm the first one to tell you that having an education at the university level is extremely important. But you need to understand that it doesn't do everything for you. You have to also understand how it feeds in your unique dream job. How do you do that? Well, first let's start with your skills. I'm a little dense and investigative, so what I did is look at 25 different employer surveys. And I reversed engineered them to look at the 5 core skill sets that employers want. And then we know at universities they talk about learning objectives, and sometimes there is a lot of overlap in terms of language, and sometimes not so much, right? So first off, that's the first thing that I did. I tried to build that bridge. And second off, I had become very good at something I didn't like to do, right? Statistical analysis. So I added a little bit of motivational psychology so that you can understand not only what you know and are competent in, but what you would like to do more of. And that's our first assessment that will enable you to learn whether you're a better fit for finance and accounting or becoming an entrepreneur. It depends on your 21st century skills that you like and want to put to work. The second level is the culture level. And for that, we now have, as Fagan said, sectors have diversified, and you don't need to become a social entrepreneur. You can be in, a traditional business maximizing shareholder value. You can also work for CSR. But you also have the choice to go for a sustainable business or a for-profit social enterprise. You can go for a nonprofit that generates its own revenue, or a traditional nonprofit that actually generates and grows through grants or donations, or you can work for governments. You are, right now in 2015, in the best position in history to merge meaning and money. So the more you can understand your priorities, the more you will know which part of this continuum is a better fit for you, so that you can talk their language to the right people at the right time and get hired faster. Finally, we know that all of those functions and all of those sectors are apparent, right? We've heard from Fagan. He's in the nonprofit, in finance and accounting. There are different roles in his institution. Unfortunately, Abel was not here. Teju is right, I'm here, Teju is right here, helping entrepreneurs feed their enterprise. And of course we have Tony, who is a social entrepreneur too, right? We are a few points, and we're both grinning because it's Friday, it's almost the reception, of course. Anyway, so we know that we're there. Whoop, that's me. But there are many other options for you, some of which you know very well, some of which not at all. And every single one of those cells speaks a different language. It's like moving countries. The gold of your skills, the gold of your knowledge has to be translated into the right currency. And that's what More Than Money Careers helps you do. Finally, it's important to understand that companies have this funny thing where the advertised culture and the actual culture might be very much in overlap or not in overlap at all. And that no matter how much that distinction is there, you also have to understand your own priorities in order for you to know whether you can function well and add value to that particular culture. So our second assessment in our website will help you understand your priorities and as they change along your career and life chapters so that you can be at the right place with the right employer at the right time. Finally, who has heard that before? Follow your passion, the money will come. That's the most moronic thing I've ever heard. Why? We have 80, that's 80 billion neurons, making trillions of connections for us every single day. Trust me, you can have more than one passion. But you gotta prioritize them and make investments in terms of which ones you turn into your career moves, which one you invest time in or money in a way that is prioritized. And that's mine, by the way. You can prioritize that and how much of your different emphasis and priorities will go into feeding yourself. Because when you invest in your passions, either by making money off of them or by investing your time, you can actually get yourself energized and looking forward to the future. So there you have it. Job titles, employers, and a direction for you to make your impact. You don't have to choose between meaning and money. You can have both, but you have to prioritize what's the best fit for you. And that only you can really understand and invest in. So I look forward to continuing working on this online platform. You have access to it for free until the end of June because you're part of the University of Maryland. And I look forward to you making your impact because God knows we need it. Thanks for your attention. And Teju is going to join you now.
Mrim. Actually, you can give that. Oh. Hi, everyone. My name is Teju, Ravilochan. I'm from Boulder, Colorado. Very pleased to be with all of you this afternoon. I was going to talk about UnReasonable Institute, but I feel like everyone is tired, so instead I'm going to tell you 3 stories that hopefully will be somewhat interesting and useful to you. I'm going to talk about the importance of attempting, about trial and error, and about moving with purpose. 3 stories to these effects. So the first story I want to tell is about a guy named Tim Ferriss. Anybody here know who Tim Ferriss is? He's the author of the book, The 4-Hour Workweek. And has anyone here read that book? Great, a couple of people, awesome. So you guys can't give the surprise ending away to this story. But Tim Ferriss is a very famous person at this point. He's a New York Times bestseller on a number of occasions. He's mastered several languages. He's a world champion tango dancer. He's a world champion kickboxer. He's done a lot of things. So he gets invited to speak at a lot of different places. And one place that invited him to speak was Princeton University. So he goes to Princeton, and he gives a speech to 300 MBA students, and he tells them, I have a fabulous surprise for someone who is willing to participate in this challenge, this experiment I'm just trying out. I'm curious if anyone wants to hear about it. After class, 20 students come up to him to hear what this challenge is, and he says, this is the challenge. Your job is to get in touch with 3 seemingly impossible people to contact: Oprah, Richard Branson, and Bill Clinton. Whoever makes the most progress in reaching out to these 3 people will win, paid for by me, a round-trip ticket anywhere you want in the entire world. Fabulous prize indeed. So he says, I'll come back in a week and we'll find out who actually is going to win. So he comes back a week later, and he is shocked by the number of people who have attempted the challenge. How many would you guess out of these 20 students have attempted the challenge? All of them 20? 0. 0. 0 people attempted this challenge. A free round-trip ticket to anywhere in the world is at stake, and no one has tried. Why? Because everyone thought that this task was impossible, that everyone else would be doing better than they would do. But Tim said that if anyone had drafted an email that so much as said, Dear Bill, they would have won. And so often we talk ourselves out of attempting things that seem so difficult simply because we believe others are going to do better than we will. And the key here is that so many people are saying that those who attempt are already on surer footing than those who do not. So that's story number 1. Story number 2 actually relates to this. It's about a French monk named Mrim who lived in 1644. In 1644, there was a puzzle that was boggling mathematicians across the world, and it was the puzzle of how to predict prime numbers. So many of you remember, perhaps from elementary and middle school math, prime numbers, right? They're numbers that can only be divided by themselves and by 1. 3 is a prime number, 5 is a prime number, 7 is a prime number, etc. We know them when they're small, but we don't know them when they're big. You know, is 433,796,833 a prime number? We don't know. And so this guy, Mrim came up with an algorithm to predict prime numbers as they grow large. The algorithm was 2 to the power of n minus 1, where n is a prime number. So let's try it. 2 to the power of 3 is 8. Well done, yes. Minus 1, 7, prime number. All right. 2 to the power of 5 is 32. I heard someone say, good. Minus 1 is 31. That's a prime number. Okay, it seems to work. So he wrote this paper in which he described this, and he wound up concluding that 2 to the 67 minus 1 is the largest prime number that we know of at the time. And so he published this paper, but he didn't have any proof or evidence for this claim. And so he eventually passed away, and mathematicians around the world were unsure as to whether or not this is in fact truly a prime number, 2 to the 67 minus 1. This became famous amongst mathematicians because no one really knew the validity of this claim or not for 259 years, until 1903, when an American mathematician named Frank Nelson Cole was invited to speak at an American Mathematical Society convention. And he comes up to this chalkboard in front of a room of 300 of the best mathematicians from across the country. He doesn't say a single word, but he picks up a piece of chalk and he goes to the blackboard and he writes 2 to the power of 67 minus 1 equals, and then writes out a 21-digit number. It takes him 2 minutes to write this number, it's so long. Nobody is saying anything because no one knows what's going on. He's not saying anything, but he goes to the other side of the blackboard and he writes one 11-digit number and then a 9-digit number, the multiplication sign, and a bar. And all of a sudden people are aware in the room of what is at stake because he begins to do rote multiplication the way that we learned to do in the 3rd grade. 1 times 7 is 7, 2 times 8 is 6, carry the 1, etc. He does this. He does this for 1 hour. Without saying a single word. Every single mathematician in the audience capable of complex algorithms and all sorts of abstract thinking is sitting there verifying whether or not this guy is multiplying these two numbers correctly. And at the end of this hour, this wordless hour, Frank Nelson Cole writes under these two numbers the final product, which is a 21-digit number that is equal to the 21-digit number on the other side of the board. The entire room stands up in thunderous applause, a 259-year-old mathematical riddle laid to rest by this guy who has proven that 2 to the 67 minus 1 is not, in fact, a prime number. Whoa! But this is not, in fact, the most interesting part of this story. The most interesting part of this story is how Frank Nelson Cole figured this out. He wouldn't tell people at first, but people badgered him and pestered him to tell him, how did you get this? Mathematicians need you to show them your work. You ever have a math teacher who's like, show me your work, right? The 300 mathematicians are like, show us your work. How did you figure this out? And so he said, okay, fine. It took me 3 years of Sundays. What? 3 years of Sundays? He would sit in his study, he would write on a piece of paper every Sunday, 2 to the 67 minus 1, he'd write out that 21-digit number, and then he would divide it by one number. And then he would find out if it divided out evenly or not. And it wouldn't, so he would move on to the next number. And that wouldn't work out, so he would move on to the next number. This took him 3 years of Sundays, 156 Sundays. It's unbelievable. He persisted. He could have given up on Sunday number 3. He could have given up on Sunday number 111. He could have given up on Sunday 155. And until computers and calculators showed up, capable of doing this kind of mathematics, we may not have known the answer to this mathematical riddle. But here's what's interesting to me. What if Frank Nelson Cole had asked for help? He spent this 156 Sundays trying to figure this out, but what if he had gotten 10 college students who want to work with a brilliant mathematician on one of the most important mathematical issues of the day? What if he invited them to his study every Sunday and took them out for a round of beers afterward or something, right? And said, you take this section of numbers, you take this section of numbers, you take this section of numbers. Could he have figured out the answer in 15.6 Sundays rather than 156? What if he'd gotten 100 people to help him, to volunteer some time to do this? He could have figured this out in 1.56 Sundays. Maybe you add a week just for coordination and communication. Even still, he could have figured it out much faster. So to me, this is amazing because this is how human progress actually takes place, through trial and error. And what's critical, however, is that we ask for help in doing that trial and error, because when we're talking about problems like poverty or like delivering people clean drinking water, we don't have 156 Sundays. We don't have that kind of time. We need to pick up the pace of our trial and error. We need to ask for help in the pursuit of trial and error. So if there's anything I want to leave you with, and I can't tell you my third story because I'm out of time, but if there's anything I want to leave you with, it is number one, to attempt. Because by attempting things, we make them possible. And two, it is to try and fail, and to try and fail, and to try and fail again and again and again, because that is the only thing that in fact does change the world. But if you do, ask for help. Thank you very much.
Repeat after me. Is that a bird? Is that a bird? Oh, y'all got to do better. Is that a bird? Is that a bird? Is that a bird? Is that a plane? Is that a plane? Now we done screaming no, it is poetry, and I'm a poet, a social agent of change. I don't need this mic. Piecing letters to words and words to sentences and sentences to sounds, leaping over metaphors in one single bound, powerful enough to spark protests for equality in ghetto communities. Talk slicker than politicians that create policies that grant rich people immunities. You see, I didn't choose to be saved by poetry. Poetry chose me. Poetry crept up inside my mama's womb, and poetry started tickling me. I've been speaking in rhythmic patterns since I was in grade 3, and I will continue until I'm through. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Keith, a simple superhero with a cape made of metaphors, and I'm glad to be here with you. Good afternoon. Y'all can clap, it's all right. So at first I wasn't sure what in the world I was up here for. I'm like, I don't consider myself an entrepreneur, but listening to these stories today, I think I'm gonna be able to weave a couple things together. So one, you mentioned this sort of idea of like making money versus making meaning, and you mentioned this sort of idea of like trial and error and following your passion anyway or something. So here are 2 poems that I'm gonna do for you to kind of tie that together. This poem is called Starving Artist, and this is for anyone who feels like the work that you're doing on behalf of the social good might not make you a whole lot of money, but damn, it feels good to do it, right? I'm a poet afraid to publish. I'm worried about seeing my words printed in a book, and on the back are all these blurbs like, this is a must read, what a #1 bestseller, what a wonderful account of an artist's words. I actually think it's absurd for some to only use their art for profit. And I'm not trying to justify the lifestyle of a starving artist, but I feel like if art really is your gift, then starving should at some point be a part of it. I feel like there should be some pangs in the pit of your stomach when your notebooks are empty and ain't no more ink left in your pen, when you aren't changing lives and your paper is thin. Y'all, I have accepted that at some point my economic reality may have to rely on my poetic balladry, and I'm not sure that my stuff is as good as I think it is, but I know that I'm no longer willing to sell my soul just to write some fallacies. And y'all, I have. I've made money, good money, writing poems at the wishes of others. I've written wedding poems and birthday poems and poems about anniversaries, poems that spice up other people's love lives. And y'all, sometimes I feel a little dirty. And used and confused about whether they actually heard me. Sometimes I wish I could turn down the volume on some of my words and transform my performances into conversations where I could just be Tony Keith, the educator, the poet, and the nerd, because I want to be known as that artsy-fartsy intellect who believed that there was power in his words, and that I not only took responsibility for what I said, but I took responsibility for those of you that heard, whether or not I made you mad or I convinced you to change the world. Let you know that sometimes I got tired. And sometimes, y'all, I promise you I got weary, but I kept on writing even when my vision was blurry, even when people told me to sit still. My parents would say, son, grass never grows under your feet. That's because I've learned I'm way too busy climbing uphill. I tell them I didn't have time to rest until the rest of my poems are written, but y'all, I can't stop writing, so none of my poems have endings, just transitions between new beginnings, and space savers while refilling the ink in my pen again, or moments when I need to stop, sleep, and dream just to recharge my system, or moments when I need to set my pen on record and just listen. Listen. I'm trying to think myself through a literary breakthrough, break down walls of bondage with poetic correspondence, and if I have to, while making change, make other people feel uncomfortable, make their spirits feel unsettled while my feet keep pushing those pedals, because I've got no choice but to keep pushing through. Y'all, I'm doing what I'm called to do. And so if you're open to receiving, then the next call may be for you, but if you don't answer, don't worry, I've got agency and I will collect when the payment is due. Now granted, I've got a couple of degrees. Thank you, Marilyn. Woo. And you know, I got a couple of degrees, and so my bank account probably won't go in the red if I spend a couple of pennies, but I've only got 2 cents to my name. And like a lot of you, the life that I want to live actually does require change, but I've got bills. So I have to keep writing until my soul gets saturated, and I hope that my wallet gets filled. And some people say, Tony, don't worry, because it is faith that'll get you through. Well, if that's the case, and if you believe in it, then faith, I now invoke you as my muse. I invoke you as my power of attorney. I want you to take over for me when I can't take over for myself. I want you to take over for me when my ego can no longer control my wealth. Faith, I don't want you to be afraid to unplug my microphone and knock all of my notebooks off the shelf. Faith, don't be afraid to let me flatline. Let me lay there till my heart gets back to beating at a humble grind. Resuscitate the power of God back into my lungs and help me create new poems, pure and simple ones. Poems about failure. Poems about victory. Poems that, for God's sakes, rhyme occasionally. Poems that resist artistic prisons, and poems that can enforce a pen is lethal system. Y'all, I'm a poet afraid to publish. But I guess I'll keep publishing on some of these stages and earn some kind of living on free open mic wages. Thank you. So, oh good, I've got time. I've got time. I might go over like by 30 more seconds, but I can't help it. So that poem is really all about, like, sometimes being motivated by money is not always gonna bring us the most amount of joy, but please, if you love the social good, if you love to create like the environment that's inclusive for everyone, like, sometimes don't always follow the money. That's all. This poem here is one of my favorites. In order for us to get to the place where we can be social innovators and entrepreneurs, we have to accept the fact that we are great people. Everybody, if you are able, take your hand like this, pat yourself on the back, say, great job. Great job. Take your hand, pat someone else on the back and say, great job. Say, you are awesome. We need to do that sometimes, folks. There are moments when we have to just accept the fact that we are amazingly great people, and it doesn't mean you're vain or conceited or that you're pretentious. Damn it, we're awesome. This poem is about being awesome. And if you've never read the book The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, you should. This poem is inspired by that book. We fear what we love. Hear me. Being awesome is a monster inside closets, watching us sleep, stealing our dreams in the dark, and when we wake, we forget how amazing we could be if we just turned the light on. If we just somehow pulled the cover from over our eyes, placed our feet on the ground, and boldly proclaimed that we are not afraid of greatness, that no matter how many nights we shiver, scared of our own success, y'all, we will at some point get a full night's rest, and we will rise with the sun. And like the sun, we will be bright and blinding and bold and hot and huge, and people will need us to survive the cold and the night. And we will awaken as warriors of weary, as soldiers of failure, as griots of fate, armed with weapons of mass construction. We will build ourselves a fortress of power, protecting ourselves from hating to be loved, and our capacity to be godlike, and our right to be present, and our calling to be parents to offsprings of our victories, and ancestors to heartbreak and loneliness and empty pockets and rumbling bellies and confusion and altered reflections. And we will no longer hold our pillows too tight at night, wishing it were a warm body, or a healthy diagnosis, or a phone call from daddy, or a note that says, look, I love you, from the person you actually want to love you. And we will awaken with muscles up on our shoulders that are strong enough to hold the world up when people need us to hold the world up because they are tired of holding the world up. And we will awaken with our voices and harmony and pitch that makes a whisper seem like a rocket ship, and a rocket ship sound like I miss you. And we will tiptoe down hallways, making footprints feel like earthquakes. And we will awaken, all of you sleeping, all of you afraid to be brilliant, all of you afraid to be acknowledged for daring to be different, for those who run when they should stand, for those who hush when they should command, for those who need to realize that you cannot hide in the light. It sticks to you like brown does on my black skin, like sap from trees rooted in sweet soil. My time is up, but you need to see that you are a star. Literally, I see you in the sky, defying laws of space, time, and gravity, because humans are not supposed to fly, but you glide like the first leaves in autumn. Your silhouette strut in daylight and dance with the moon. You are part of a collective, a critical mass of intellectuals governed by divine knowledge, which means that you are meant to be here with a purpose. Just like I am meant to be here with a purpose, we are purposefully meant to be here. And do you want to know why? Yes, so that the sick can become a healer, so that the timid can become a leader, so that the weary can become a teacher, and so that the boogeyman, y'all, the boogeyman became a poet. Thank you so much.